Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is week 5 of the history of fashion. So I'd like to talk with you about the Romantic style, the second one of the great styles of the long 19th century, the one happening after the neoclassical style, after the fall of Napoleon. This is the style that might be observed from around 1815 to perhaps the accession of Queen Victoria in 1837. Again, this is quite a long period, so there will be some changes and variations during those times, but this is generally the period in cultural history of Britain and generally Western culture that corresponds with the Romantic movement. Another word that is used for this period, mostly in the continental context, is Biedermeier. Biedermeier is the style after the Empire style, the Napoleonic style, and it shares a lot of characteristics with the Romantic fashion. Of course, it does not end overnight, does not begin overnight with the fall of Napoleon, so you might have some early signs of the growing interest in the inspirations typical for Romanticism, such as the Middle Ages and other historical periods other than classical antiquity, nature, folk costumes again, and exotic costumes from far away lands that sometimes appear already in the neoclassical period, but by the 1820s they really are dominant, and actually if you compare the Romantic fashions with the neoclassical fashions, they are in stark contrast, really. So the idea behind the Romantic fashion was to get as anti-classical as possible. This is the style that is sometimes ridiculed or has been ridiculed in contemporary culture studies. If you look at some of the fashion plates from the 1820s, the 1830s, this was the height of this fashion, they sometimes look fussy and nonsensical and just silly with those exaggerated sleeves with enormous hats and very complicated hairstyles, but sometimes, especially in the portraits, it's much more aesthetically pleasing. It's imaginative, lively, extravagant, but in a good way. This was the taste that valued individualism, that valued fantasy and lack of restraint. This was also something that's very typical as a contrast to the neoclassical fashion. This was a very civilian style. This was the style that tried to get as far from the military associations in dress as possible. So there is nothing heroic about it. It's all concentrated on pleasure, joy, kind of cheerfulness, basically, even, and this is really in stark contrast with the earlier style. So the features of female dress, because again we are going to focus mostly on the female dress, They develop slowly, so you may remember from our discussion of the very late or kind of transitional styles between late neoclassicism and early romanticism, the column-like shape of the silhouette and the kind of drapery effect of the clothes starts to be replaced by a more structured, tailored look. So especially visible in the skirts. The elevated waistlines would still be there for quite a while. They were probably the last neoclassical element to go away, but the skirts would be in the shape of an elongated triangle rather than just a flowing drapery, with something very, very characteristic being the hem decorations. The emphasis put on the horizontal line of the bottom of the skirt. So we have a lot of decorations either in the form of embroidery or flounces, usually a couple of small flounces, or very, very often you have three-dimensional applications, so like three-dimensional decorations that are sewn into the bottom part of the skirt. The hem could be narrow or somewhat broader. It could be in the same color as the dress itself. This was in fact the most common occurrence, or in contrasting colors sometimes. This would be one of the most popular aspects of the early romantic styles, those decorated hems for all kinds of clothing. So the morning dress, the day dress, the evening dress. There would be other distinctive features, but the hems would normally be decorated. So we have this feature being developed and explored, so the skirt itself will grow and become fuller, and the horizontal effect will be emphasized for a time and then replaced with other focus points for the fashion. A very popular aspect of the romantic skirt is the length. This is the walking length. This is the relatively short skirt. Short in the 19th century means you can see the shoes. This is not the floor length skirt. This is what they call the walking length skirt, so you can see the shoes of the wearer. This is true for very many garments of this period, for day dresses and even evening dresses alike. So some elements like the train that was very popular in the neoclassical period are no longer in fashion, at least for a while. Another very important element of the romantic fashion is the sleeve. This is probably the most characteristic aspect of the romantic fashion. The sleeves are emphasized and they create another horizontal line in the silhouette, so the shoulders, at least originally, it later starts to change, but we'll talk about it in a moment. The shoulders are emphasized, they are broadened, and the fact that the fullness of the sleeves starts relatively high, so from the shoulder, from the point of the shoulders rather than lower on the sleeve. This even exaggerates the shoulders even more. So we have like the hourglass figure beginning. So the narrow waist, initially still elevated, but gradually the position of the waist descends to the natural level, because this is the narrowest point in a human figure. So we have this narrow waist with emphasized broad shoulders and broad hems. So rather than have a very vertical silhouette of a kind of column-like shape with very elevated waistline and a drapery like dress. We have the triangular shape and the hourglass shape, emphasizing the fashionable silhouette, the fashionable shape of the body. So the sleeves are initially quite pronounced, and for a bigger part of the Romantic period, they will be the focus of the fashion. So very big puffy sleeves for day and evening. Of course, for day they would be long sleeves, for evening they would be short usually, but also very very full. Sometimes, as you will see in some illustrations, you will have yes, you will have Watson here. Come here, Watson. You will have decorative, transparent. Watson, go away. Transparent oversleeves as pure decoration. Weź go stąd. Rather than any practical effect in the evening. So there would be small full sleeves and decorative transparent oversleeves. You'll see that in a little while. The most popular type of the day sleeve is the sleeve called the leg of mutton sleeve. So it's very full on the shoulder and just gradually going narrower towards the wrist. Another popular variation, because the sleeves are very susceptible to seasonal variations and fads, and they are really a very visible focus of this fashion. Another variation are all kinds of paneled sleeves, so sleeves that are subdivided usually by bands of fabric or ribbons into smaller sections. They could be of equal size, they could be of differing size, so the ones closer to the shoulder would be bigger, and the ones more towards the bottom of the sleeve, the wrist, would be smaller. So we have all kinds of names for these sleeves. So the leg of mutton, or the gigot, this is apparently a French word for a leg of mutton, or variations, for example, à la girafe. So we have like this kind of paneled sleeve with a few panels. So there is a band around the arm, and then another one a little above the shoulder, then another one a few inches below the shoulder, and so the whole sleeve would be subdivided. For the evening short full sleeves, they are usually called the balloon sleeve. So it's like a kind of round balloon shape. If you watch those YouTube reconstructions and dressing up in, let's say, the 1830s, you can sometimes see the women who wear these reconstructed clothes presenting the dress improvers for the romantic sleeves. So kind of cushions. They look like soft round cushions that you insert into the sleeve, or you wear around your arm to keep the fullness of the sleeve in place. So that's a very characteristic issue. The effect really wasn't heavy. The majority of materials were lightweight, in bright, clear colors. They only had natural colorings, natural dyes, so these colors were brighter but not as extreme as some of the chemical colors that are only invented in the second half of the 19th century. So for a while, white dresses, especially white skirts, become popular, but then again we have the growing popularity of colored clothes, colored garments in a variety of colors. You'll see it in the fashion plates. There are lots of decorations, whereas the neoclassical period favored simplicity and the decorations were limited. Here in the Romanticism, decorations are everything. So long, flattering ends of ribbons from the hats and bonnets, gauze, so kind of semi-transparent materials, lace, embroidery, those applications used for decorating the dresses. They are everywhere, and as we'll talk in a little while, the headwear is also very, very elaborate, and it's one of the important aspects of these fashions. Most of the dresses are one piece. One-piece gowns are usual for day and evening wear. There was a very popular type of day wear called the pelisse robe. So a robe meaning a dress. A pelisse, if you remember from last week, was one of the outer garments, was one of the types of overcoats. Of course, they are still known, and you still have the redingotes or the Spencers, probably slightly in different shape, especially regarding the sleeves. But the pelisse robe was a cross between a dress, a day dress, a walking or carriage dress, and a pelisse, so an outer garment. This was especially popular in the warmer season of the year. So when the lady didn't want to wear many layers of clothing, but she wanted to look elegant and fashionable, she might choose a dress, a day dress, in the shape resembling the outer garment as well. So this was quite popular. Otherwise, we have all kinds of outdoor garments. Shawls were still popular. They were quite useful with those big sleeves, as well the capes and cloaks and mantles, so something that wouldn't really crush the puffed sleeve. We have long scarves worn over the shoulders with the ends twisted or hanging down the front for kind of added movement, added lightness. This is a fashion that really favors that. We have lots and lots of accessories, decorative collars, sometimes in historical shapes like the ruff collar, something that looks Tudor, flat collars, shoulder capes, so decorative arrangement on the bodies that emphasizes the shoulders even more. So anything that emphasized the horizontal lines was fashionable. The fichus, so the scarves, the neck and shoulder scarves, very popular in the mid-20s, in the early 30s. Like the height of the fashion really is between, let's say, 1825 and 1830. Then it starts to deflate, so let's say the fullness of the sleeves goes lower down the length of the arm. Most bodices had a round waist, so the pointed bodices with this kind of V-shaped dip in front are relatively rare. They will be very popular in the Victorian fashion. You can sometimes find a small dip in front of the waist, but it's rare. So that's what we have. The trimming, the draping, everything that can be decorated is decorated. Bodices are very highly decorated, usually to emphasize this kind of triangular shape of the bodice itself, with pleatings and bands of material applied to the bodice. Usually they just get together, they converge at the front of the bodice. You'll see it in some of the illustrations in a little moment. The underclothing is more important, of course, because it is expected to create the shape of this fashion. So small waists are fashionable, so the stays becomes more tightly laced and more important. It's not only an option to flatten your figure if it's not very slim. It's really becoming indispensable, because the fashionable waist is smaller than the natural waist, so it needs to be clinched, it needs to be molded by the undergarments. So that's a novelty. Corsets and stays, as they are still called mostly, are laced at the back, so we do not really have this front fastening that will be very popular in the Victorian period. It was a novelty, a technological improvement, to have this kind of panel made of metal with hooks and eyes. It's normally with hooks and eyes are basically the most typical way of fastening anything. Back lacing. The fullness of the skirts required some support from beneath, so this was done by laying layers upon layers of petticoats, so underskirts, the elements of underclothing that would be worn one on top of another, sometimes many, like 5, 8, even more, worn on top of each other. So if you could see a lady from below, from beneath, she would look like a tree, with the shoes in the middle and the circles of concentric petticoats around that. So sometimes one of the petticoats would be made of a stouter cotton or the horsehair fabric. This was the original crinoline. The crinoline was the name used originally for the stiff horsehair petticoat. Later on, in the Victorian period, in the mid-50s, it will be replaced by a metal crinoline frame, but the original word defined a kind of petticoat. So the hairstyles, very, very fanciful, very dramatic, especially in the evening, because of course during the day some sort of headwear would be worn. So caps were still popular among married ladies or older ladies. Otherwise, bonnets and hats, they are also very susceptible to fashion, very characteristic for the styles. For the evening, very decorative, ornamental, complicated hairstyles that would definitely require the help of another person, mostly a servant. So the ladies who could afford to have a personal servant called a lady's maid would expect this servant to be a good hairdresser. The most popular variation was called the Apollo knot. So it was like a big knot of hair on top of the head, fastened with some jewels or feathers or pins. There are lots of decorations, combs, flowers, ribbons, the so-called trembling ornaments, so kind of big pins with with decorative chains or other jeweled ornaments. So in some circles, like the rich, the aristocracy, this was really the focus of the fashion, showing off. During the day, as I say, a cap or a bonnet or a hat. At this time, hats and bonnets look almost identical, so they are sometimes used as synonyms, the caps and the bonnets. So yeah, we stop here, and in a moment we'll just continue looking at the fashion plates and other illustrations.